Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to share with you an exciting game that Larry Christiansen played against the British Grandmaster Glenn Flair, and he developed a beautiful attack. And I think on one hand, it's going to be a beautiful example of how to attack, how to develop an attack successfully. And also, it will give you some ideas how to approach the Maran defense. One of the options, at least, how you can try to play a relatively less known approach from White's perspective against perhaps the most popular opening currently against d4, the Maran. And here we go. The game started out with d4, d5, c4, c6, and we are reaching the crossroads soon in the Slav, whether White chooses to sacrifice the pawn on c4 at this stage by playing knight to f3 and allowing black to take on c4, or at this point to play e3, which typically transfers to the Maran. Although at this point black still has an option to rather try to fianchetto the dark squared bishop with g6, bishop g7 and play the Schlechter variation. But it is much more common to continue as black did in the game by playing e6. Now we're in the Maran defense where White most often plays knight f3 developing, and black responds by playing knight b to d7. At this stage there are a number of roads for White. Surprisingly, it became quite popular in the past decade for White to play queen c2, which is not the surprising part, but the surprising move is to play g4 right now. It at first looks pretty crazy, but in reality White has nothing to fear. If right now black captures that pawn on g4, White gets actually a pretty strong attack with rook g1 attacking the knight and then capturing the pawn on g7 and so on, as even Garry Kasparov has played successfully on several occasions. However, that's not what we are going to see in this lesson. We are going to see the standard move bishop d3 after knight bd7, White playing bishop to d3 and allowing black the capture on c4. Black, of course, was waiting with this capture for the White bishop to move out, so the bishop will have to capture back on c4 in two moves instead of just one. The bishop, as we've seen, already has moved to d3, and now it would need to move a second time, capturing back on c4. And black now gains time by attacking the bishop with b5, and this is a main crossroad where White needs to decide where to put the bishop. Over the years, White has experimented with all three logical moves, bishop b3, bishop d3, or bishop e2. In the overwhelming majority of the games, White chooses typically bishop to d3 in order to support the then e-pawn advancement e3 to e4. And I am talking about bishop to d3. And yet the other two options has been tried out in a good number of games, and in this lesson we will focus on the situations what happen after bishop e2. I have to say that I have personally played this many times and with a lot of success, so I would consider it kind of one of my pet variations. First of all, I'd like to point out the main idea behind this move that sometimes catches off guard even experienced players, even masters, or above that. On one hand, this move has a surprise effect because most people are counting more on the bishop d3 move, as that's the most popular. And against that, one of the main moves for black is to play a6, to follow up after e4 by playing c5, immediately getting counterplay in the center, and after e5, black would capture on d4, counterattacking White's knight. So if now white pawn takes e5 to f6, the black pawn will take the white knight on c3, and black would be just fine. On the other hand, if white right now would try to capture with the knight on d4, that would hang the pawn on e5. So black would have the opportunity to capture knight d7, capturing on e5. And therefore, in this position, the best option for white is knight capturing on b5 to gain a pawn there, and then to capture black's knight on f6. Well, this has a lot of deep theories, and the game gets very complicated, but not giving white a clear advantage. So, let me get back to our game of this lesson and see what is different. When the bishop in this position, after it has been attacked, doesn't retreat to d3, but it retreats to e2, the big difference is that now, if black does the same thing, playing a6, white, after playing e4, and black playing c5 and e5, and if now black tries to do the same exact thing, then all of a sudden, because the white bishop on d3 is not blocking the queen's way, the queen is able to capture back, not just the knight. And now the beautiful thing from white's perspective is that the queen is nicely located on d4, and the knight on f6 is still hanging, unable to occupy any of the desirable squares on d5 or e4, and therefore the knight will have to go to some awkward square like g8, giving white a significant advantage out of the opening. So this is kind of the main idea behind this line. Now let's go back to our game. Bishop e2, and black played probably the best move in this position, which was bishop to b7, delaying the a6 c5 idea for a moment. And white here has two main options. Castling is one, and playing e4 immediately is another. We won't have time to go through all the details about all the lines. Therefore, let's just continue for now with white castling immediately. And in this position, black has to be careful. I would suggest from black's perspective to rather try bishop e7 in this position, or the immediate b4, and then developing with bishop e7. Black in the game, instead of either of those choices, played a6, preparing the standard pattern of opening up the diagonal for black's bishop on b7 and playing c5. And white continued with e4. Here there is an interesting variation that black has tried in numerous games by playing b4, attacking the knight with the idea, so if the knight from c3 now moves away, then the pawn on e4 would be hanging. However, white's idea now is not to move the knight, but to advance the pawn, attack black's knight. And after pawn captures knight, and if black is trying to get greedy and win a pawn by capturing on b2 first, white would not recapture, but would also make an intermediate move by capturing on g7. And in some games, black now tried to promote the pawn and get a new queen, when of course white would try to do just that also. And now we have a fascinating position with 4 queens on the board just after 14 moves into the game. I'm having the pleasure to share with you that I had this position a number of times in my career, and it is a lot of pleasure to play this position, and I think I have to say I won every time I got these positions with the 4 queens on the board. The reason why this position favors white is that the white king is safer by being castled than the black king can ever plan to be in this position. As you can see, it's highly unlikely. In fact, it's impossible for black to castle to the king side because there is no rook there anymore. And castling to the queen side will not bring much safety either in view of the open b file and half-open c file. So therefore, it's certainly not recommendable for black to go for this. However, if you're considering to play this line with white, it's certainly one of the traps that your opponent may fall for. Okay, let's get back now again to the actual game between Larry Christiansen and Glenn Flair. And here we go. So in this position, after white just played e4, black responded by playing c5, and that's certainly the best option at this point for black. And now white continues with e5 with the already similar idea that we learned about. If now c takes d4, white would capture with the queen. But black instead moved the knight to d5, which is a better idea here. And the difference is compared to a previous situation when the black bishop wouldn't be on b7, that if now white captures knight takes d5, the black bishop can recapture, not just the pawn. And certainly that's how black should recapture in case white would now trade on d5. And now white changes gears and plays a4, all of a sudden trying to provoke another weakness in black's pawn structure, and also trying to open the position in view of the better development of the white pieces. Black still needs a couple of moves to castle. In the meantime, black is busy responding to white's offense on the queen side. If black right now would play b4, white's idea would be just to position the knight on e4, and then the knight would come real handy towards the d6 square. Especially if you can imagine the dark squared bishops disappearing, that knight on d6 could be a real powerhouse. So for example, if bishop e7, bishop g5 certainly would be the idea to consider. So let's go back again. And in this key position, black responded by trading knights immediately on c3 to have less target towards the b5 pawn. And white, of course, recaptures. And black chose to play c4. Well, the idea is clear. Now that the pawn is blocking up the diagonal of the white bishop on e2, so finally, the pawn on b5 is safe. And now, of course, it's an important moment. It's a new stage in the game. And the question is how to proceed. What plan should white follow up? There are probably at least two plans here for white that are logical. One is trying to play kind of positionally and eventually get a knight to that tempting d6 square. Another one is the way the American Grandmaster continued and trying to play for an attack on the king side. As we can see, the black king is not likely to find safety on the queen side. Therefore, we'll have to try to castle on the king side. And that's exactly what white was preparing for. The other option was to play bishop g5 right now, provoking the exchange of the dark squared bishops. Probably both give white pretty good chances. The game continued with knight g5, and in reality this is quite a tricky move. If black would play the natural h6 move, because typically when a knight goes to one of those squares like g5 or a black knight to g4, the most logical first question should be, what if the little pawn on the h-file just attacks the knight? And if the response would need to be that the knight needs to retreat to where it came from, then of course it made no sense to go there in the first place. However, in this case, white had a very sneaky plan, namely to sacrifice on e6, a beautiful move, and then the two bishops work perfectly together with the first check on the light squares, and then from the other side with bishop a3. Really cool, isn't it? Let's go back just a tiny bit to the position where the white knight appeared on g5. And in this position, black has been suggested as an improvement to play bishop d5 compared to the game move, although I personally think white has the initiative even now, whether playing bishop f3 right away or perhaps provoking further weakenings of the dark squares by bishop h5 and provoking g6 and then retreating to f3. I think I personally would clearly choose white here as well. Let's go back again to the position after knight went to g5 and see how the game continued after black played bishop e7, which of course is also a very logical move, developing, getting ready to castle, and attacking the knight on g5. Again, one of those situations, if the knight would need to retreat, oh well, that would be bad news for white, because then knight g5 would be considered a waste of time. But Larry has prepared a very efficient move to help the attack. And that move was to play bishop to f3 in this position, obviously offering an exchange of the bishops. And if the black bishop takes the knight instead, for example, bishop g5, then bishop would capture on b7. And now, for example, rook b8. White already could capture the pawn on a6, but even more powerful would be to trade bishops on g5 and then create a deadly pin over the black knight on d7. Because of that pin and the pressure on the knight, black is unable to castle, so black will need to waste time to protect the knight first before black would get ready to castle, and in the meantime black would be likely to lose the pawn on b5, or for example, like in this variation, allow the white rook to come in and put black into a miserable situation. Let's go back again to where the game continuation continues here with bishop f3, and we are looking at what happens after black continued with bishop captures on f3, which is the best choice. Of course, the queen will recapture, creating the deadliest of all threats, checkmate on f7. And again, the problem is that the black rooks are not yet connected, and therefore, after bishop g5, the black queen would be unable to capture the bishop, because then the rook all of a sudden on a8 would be unprotected. On the other hand, if black would try to hang on to the rook with the queen, then already white would be ready to win at least a pawn by capturing on b5 due to the pin along the a file. Let's get back again to the game. After queen took on f3, black played the best choice, castling. So it seems like black survived, finally got to castle. The rook on a8 is safe because now the both rooks are connected, even though the queen is in between. But nevertheless, even through the queen, both the queen and the rook protect the queen rook on a8. Moreover, the white knight is still hanging on g5. Also, strategically speaking, the black knight is ready to come to b6 and then to d5, and that certainly looks like a great outpost for the black knight. However, white played very aggressively and developed the attack quickly enough to cause a lot of trouble for black. White continued by protecting the knight. Generally, try not to retreat with your pieces unless you absolutely have to. After queen g4, black responded with a natural move, knight b6, which on one hand threatens the pawn on a4 and on the other hand aims to get to d5. White responded by pawn capturing on b5, pawn captured back, and rook a8. As so often, our strategy, our plan, our attack is based on specific tactics, and this is no exception. For example, if the queen would right now capture on a8, white all of a sudden would respond with knight capturing on e6, and if pawn captures back, queen captures, and the knight on b6 would be gone. So, going back again, after rook captured on a8, black had no choice, if they didn't want to lose material, but capturing back with the knight. And now, the knight returned to e4, which is a temporary retreat, on one hand opening up the diagonal for white's bishop. So if black would continue with knight b6, which would be a natural move, then white would be ready to play bishop h6, and then black would be forced to play g6 and give up the exchange. So black rather moved the king out of the pin, very logical, understandable move. However, it still keeps the black knight away from its outpost on d5. And now it's time to bring more resources to the attack, and therefore white played rook e1. The idea is simply to move the rook up to the third rank and then to move to g3 or h3, aiding the queen and of course the minor pieces in the attack. And now black played good-looking move, played b4, looking for counterplay, and white brought the rook up. So now we're reaching the climax of the game, where black has serious threats. Black could play b3, creating a far advanced protected passed pawn, or play as he did in the game by capturing on c3. All of these reach very interesting positions, and I suggest, if you have time, try to analyze this position on your own. And then, after you did your own analysis, I would give myself, I would say, half an hour. After that, try to compare your analysis with Ripka or Fritz or one of the top software programs that, of course, have extremely good, especially tactical skills. So in such position, those are very reliable, even more so than humans, perhaps. Just to give you some ideas, if b3, rook h3 would be the move, and for example, queen d5, the main idea is to play knight f6. If pawn captures, then rook g3, and black is helpless, or if bishop captures, then pawn captures, and again if pawn captures, then rook g3. There is a lot more variations, but I don't want to take the experiment away from you, so I suggest you kind of go back and do those analyses on your own and then try to check with one of the software that you may have. The game actually continued by black capturing pawn on c3, and white again continued with rook h3. Now black has to be very careful, because if queen would capture on d4, white would be ready to jump with the knight to f6. After queen d4, white could jump knight f6, threatening with rook h7 if queen takes queen, or if pawn takes the knight, then the black queen would be hanging. Let's go back again. Black did not capture on d4, but played a defensive move by playing g6 right now. And now the white queen came to f4, aiming to go queen h6 and then to checkmate. And here black made a mistake that ended the game real quick. Played g5, trying to keep the white queen away from the h6 square. The problem was that after knight f6, black cannot avoid getting checkmated within a couple of moves, because rook h7 is coming, or if bishop now captures on f6, then the sneaky queen e4 puts black in front of unsolvable problems. Let's go back just one moment here. If instead of g5, black was better off trying queen d4, although even in that case, white's attack seems quite strong. And here, White will need to waste some time because black now threatens to checkmate on the back rank, but after playing g4, white's attack still seems quite overwhelming. Well, I hope you enjoyed this amazing game, a great attacking game. Also, I think it's a pretty practical idea to play against the Maran. And before we end the lesson, I'd like to show you the jewel of the week. As usual, I'd like to suggest you take your time and try to figure out a solution by yourself before you listen to the solution. Generally speaking, when there are only 2 rooks on the board versus a queen, the game would end in a draw. However, this is an exception. Even though there doesn't seem to be an obvious way for white to create an immediate fork or skewer or pin on black's queen. However, there is a relatively quick way to indeed either win the black queen or checkmate black's king. There is only one way to accomplish this. Good luck in trying to find it. And now here is the solution. White simply gives a check, and then when the black king attacks the rook, retreats the rook to c4. Quite amazingly, black now has no defense against the white rook coming to b2 to check, and then if the black king ends up on the a file while the black queen is there as well, then just rook a2, pinning them. Or if the queen simply gets out of the way, then, for example, by queen e7, then rook b2, and simply checkmate. Quite amazing, isn't it? Well, that's all we had for today. I hope you enjoyed the lesson and will be able to use some of the ideas in your own games. Thank you for listening, and so long until next time. Bye-bye.